Introduce the first of our keynote speakers today. In line with recent work in Ireland to develop the Limerick Framework for Action, which, as you know, provides a roadmap to advance the international health promoting campuses agenda, we are honoured to have two colleagues driving this work in Canada and look forward to learning from their experiences. Dr. Jennifer Thannhauser is a registered psychologist and academic director, Mental Health and Wellbeing in the University of Calgary's Office of Institutional Commitments. She also serves as Evaluation and Research Lead for UCalgary's Community Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy and leads the university's inaugural post-secondary mental health and wellbeing research and knowledge hub. Professor Thannhauser is committed to advancing a holistic, upstream, whole university approach to mental health and wellbeing. Drawing on over 12 years of experience as a post-secondary counsellor and administrator in student wellness services, her research focuses on strengthening student mental health through strengths-based and systems approaches. She co-developed the Roots to Resiliency program, recognised as a promising practice by BPNet, and awarded a Taylor Institute Teaching Award for Education Leadership. Professor Thannhauser has received multiple national Tri-Council grants to advance understanding of resilience in post-secondary settings and currently leads a national multidisciplinary SSHRC-funded study examining students' perceptions of resilience. She'll be joined today by Dr. Vicki Squires, who serves as Associate Dean, Research, Graduate Support and International Initiatives, and is a professor in the Department of Educational Administration and the College of Education at the University of Saskatchewan. Her areas of research are post-secondary education and student well-being. Dr. Squires has been the lead of multiple grants exploring the implementation of the Okanagan Charter on campuses in Canada and globally. She has published and presented on the work of health promoting universities and the Okanagan Charter. She is also the lead editor on a co-edited book that includes international co-authored papers written by researchers involved in health promotion efforts on their campuses. Today, Professor Thannhauser and Dr. Squires will talk to us about moving from local to global, building international partnerships to advance healthy campuses, a Canadian perspective.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is such a privilege to be here with all of you today, and we're really looking forward to being able to learn together. So while we're bringing forward experiences that we have from the Canadian context, we are also really looking forward to learning with all of you and the wonderful leadership that you have brought to the health promotion space for higher education. So we are focused today on bringing forward a Canadian story around health promotion in higher education, while also really interested in exploring the linkages globally and opportunities to learn and grow together as we continue to advance kind of the mission of health promotion in higher education. So our goal for today is, as I mentioned, to provide a bit of an overview of the Canadian higher education kind of context. We will provide some background around Canadians' progress and movement through health promotion and various guides and frameworks that have informed mental health and well-being in higher education. And then talk a little bit more about our role through the Canadian Health Promoting Campuses Network in terms of building bridges both locally, nationally, and internationally. And then really as we finish off today is having a conversation around some of the shared challenges globally that influence mental health and well-being in the higher education context, and begin to think about opportunities where we can work together and collaborate together as we really, again, try to influence thriving cultures in higher education, which we know really influence the broader culture within which we live and work as well. So in the Canadian context, as part of national actions towards truth and reconciliation, our practice is to recognize the relationship between Indigenous people and their traditional territories, acknowledge our colonial history and its ongoing impact on Indigenous peoples, and also engage in self-reflection. So with that note, the University of Calgary, where I'm located, is situated on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 in southern Alberta. This land is home to the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Iarhi Nakota nations of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney. The City of Calgary is also part of the historic homeland of Métis Nation of Alberta, including Nose Hill Métis District 5 and Elbow Métis District 6. And I'll turn it over to Vicki in terms of University of Saskatchewan.
And the University of Saskatchewan, I chose a land acknowledgement from the Indigenous Truth Policy, the Tapweewin Indigenous Truth Policy, developed in part to ensure that pretendians did not take advantage of Indigenous-specific hires for faculty, Indigenous-specific spots in admissions, or for scholarships. So the land is acknowledged as our mother, the earth. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to honor and support the Indigenous peoples, Indigenous cultures, Indigenous values, and Indigenous languages that belong to the land of Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to working towards mending colonized lands and protecting the land in a way that demonstrates honor, respect, and love. The University of Saskatchewan extends this commitment to the lands and treaty territories, Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10, that constitute Kisaskatchewan, and all Indigenous people that call Kisaskatchewan home. We are born to the land, and the land claims us.
Through our consultations with Indigenous elders who inform a lot of the work that we do within our university, we've also heard about the importance of really taking an inclusive approach to acknowledging the land. And so we do acknowledge the enduring relationships of Indigenous peoples around the world who maintain the land, and we commit ourselves to learning from their knowledge systems, upholding respectful relationships, and advancing truth, reconciliation, and Indigenous sovereignty in all that we do. So just to give you a little bit of context about where we're from and the perspectives that we're bringing to the conversation today, we just wanted to provide a little bit of context about our universities. And so as I mentioned, I'm from the University of Calgary, which is in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, right beside the Rocky Mountains. And so an hour's drive, and I get to be out in the glorious mountains. Many of you might be familiar with Banff, Alberta, which is quite a well-known international tourist destination. And so the University of Calgary is actually a relatively young university. We're celebrating our 60th birthday this year. And so it was established in 1966. We have over 37,000 students, including undergraduate students and graduate students. We have 14 faculties across 5 campuses. So our main campus, which is pictured here, has many of our faculties, but then we have 4 other campuses distributed throughout the city, which creates its own challenges in terms of accessing resources and supports across the various campuses. University of Calgary is also ranked in the top 5 of the research-intensive universities in Canada. I'll pass it over to Vicki.
The University of Saskatchewan is part of the 15 research-intensive universities, not nearly at number 5, but we're part of the top 15. And we became a province in 1905. The university was established right afterwards in 1907. We have 26,500 students, of which about 12% are Indigenous. We have 17 schools and colleges, including a very broad array of health colleges: dentistry, pharmacy, nutrition, nursing, medicine, vet med, public health, VITO, the level 4 infectious diseases lab, the speech and language and occupational therapy, pharmacy and nutrition, agriculture, and then outside of the health sphere, our other well-known area is agriculture and bioresources. We are very spread out, as you can tell, but that's just a small piece of it. We have a lot of research, agriculture research lands spread basically throughout the province. That's me, sorry. All right, so I'm going to provide a bit of context on the Canadian higher ed landscape. And please do, at the breaks afterwards, if you have more questions, I'm happy to talk about it because this is kind of my area of research is governance in post-sec. So, and interestingly, there's the map of Canada. It's about 10 million square kilometers across. So that is a huge challenge for us. There's 10 provinces and the 3 territories in the north. We became a country in 1867 as part of the Commonwealth and only got our own constitution in 1982. And the way we were set up with the powers that are distributed federally or provincially was heavily influenced by the fact that there was a civil war going on in the States at the same time. So in their wisdom, the Fathers of Confederation, because of course it was all men, they decided that health and education would fall under provincial jurisdiction, which makes it incredibly difficult then to have any kind of coordinating mechanisms in either of those sectors. We do have our research agency is a federal research agency, the Tri-Council, representing social sciences, health research, and then more or less the natural sciences and engineering. And so that is the only kind of mechanism they have for funding universities other than capital projects that you have to apply for separately. All of it comes from the provincial government for the most part. We highlighted where our 2 cities are. Almost all of the Canadians are in the lower third of Canada, almost all. And so we have huge challenges. We have 5 different time zones to work across. And it looks like Calgary and Saskatoon are really close together, but that's actually 650 kilometers. And this is the prairies until you get to the mountains. So literally when I'm driving to Calgary, there's one spot that it's 450 kilometers before you have to turn. So you kind of weave a bit. Avoid the animals, but that's it. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention. Saskatchewan is the hardest to spell and the easiest to draw. Even grade 2ers can get that right. So across the Canadian landscape, unlike our Americans to the south, we have not that many universities. We have 96 universities. Almost all are publicly funded. Only a very small portion are privately funded, mostly religious affiliation. And the way that we are funded, approximately 30%, and my province is probably the best at giving money to post-secondary. The rest comes from research funds, a real push for donors right now, probably here too, tuition for sure, and international tuition, entrepreneurship, and patents. And I put in brackets in the title, higher education, because in Canada we have a complex system. Provincially, again, the universities look a lot the same, but the colleges and polytechnics are very different depending on where you are in Canada. So we broadly classify them as post-secondary education, not tertiary education. Interestingly, we rarely use that term. The universities are more autonomous in terms of governance than, for sure, the polytechnics, who are much more mandated by provincial governments.
All right, so we'd like to take maybe 10-15 minutes to provide a bit of an overview of where Canada has been and where we've been going in terms of mental health and well-being specifically, and some of the frameworks, guidelines, charters that have informed the work that we've done across Canada. can acknowledge that Canada has been actively committed to improving the health and well-being of Canadian citizens for many years, as early as the Ottawa Charter in 1986, and then the Edmonton Charter for Post-Secondary Mental Health and Well-Being in 2005. And then more recently, you can start to notice that we have more frequent kind of development and engagement of various guidelines and frameworks as post-secondary institutions have really embedded or invested in mental health and well-being. And so at the beginning here, and I'll go through each of these in a little bit, we have the Canadian Mental Health Strategy that was developed in 2012. And then building out of that and kind of alongside, we had the very first post-secondary student mental health guide, a systemic approach. And this was developed by the Canadian Association of University and College Student Services with colleagues across Canada, and really became the first kind of foundational document that really started to inform the initiatives for mental health and well-being in higher education within Canada. And then from this, we also saw some efforts in the workplace well-being space with the development of the National Standard for Workplace Psychological Safety. And in terms of this national standard, so we have a standards group within Canada. It's called the CSA group. And they really develop standards for safety, health and well-being, and economic efficiency as well. We use them for the safety of toasters. And so we often we'll get toasters or anything with an electrical outlet, and it'll be labeled with a CSA verification. So they do testing and verification of various things in terms of safety. And it's really quite unique that we've developed national standards for health and well-being. And so the first was the Workplace Psychological Safety Standard. And then we moved into the Okanagan Charter, which Canada was a significant voice in that process. And then we developed the first Canadian national standard for mental health and well-being for post-secondary students. And so I'll talk about that one just shortly. And then, of course, we are all very familiar with the Limerick framework. And Vicki and I both had the privilege of being in Limerick last year and being part of those conversations. Alongside the development of these national and international guidelines and frameworks, we also had the development of campus-specific mental health strategies. So again, I'll talk about that a little bit more specifically in a minute. So on the left here, we have kind of the front page of Canada's first mental health strategy, and it aims to help improve the mental health and well-being of all people living in Canada and to create a mental health system that can truly meet the needs of people living with mental health problems and illnesses and their families. The strategy translates the vision into 26 priorities and 109 specific recommendations, which are all grouped within 6 strategic directions. And then on the right of this document, or of this slide, we have the Workplace Wellbeing Standard. And so, as I mentioned, it was really the first national standard for psychological safety in the workplace, and it has become really a significant guiding document for informing workplace well-being. And so many post-secondary institutions use this in terms of employee mental health and well-being, and this becomes one of the guiding documents that guides that work. So, as I mentioned, Canada also developed the Post-Secondary Student Mental Health Guide to a Systemic Approach. And this was really significant in terms of leading the development of mental health strategies within Canada. And so it was the first comprehensive framework for addressing student mental health using a systems perspective. And you'll see a lot of health promotion language within this framework as well. And so it has been used to guide the development of mental health strategies and implementation of mental health frameworks within higher education. It is grounded in social equity and sustainability. It's guided by student voices, and so students are really centered as key collaborators in development of services and supports. And it emphasizes the collective and shared responsibility in creating environments that support learning and well-being. So just wanted to provide a bit of an overview of what this framework looked like. And so it was designed, kind of broken into 3 major sections, where the top section is really focused on the health and well-being of all students. And then the middle section is looking at students who are expressing some concern around how they're coping with their mental health and well-being. So these are generally healthy students, but are noticing that they're struggling in some ways and wanting to have some guidelines around how we support those students. And then there's also recognition of a need for different supports and resources for students with more significant mental health challenges and mental illnesses. And so at the top layer, we're looking at institutional structure such as policies, procedures, monitoring and continuous improvement, creating supportive environments, which include physical spaces, resources for teaching and learning, and universal design for learning principles. So we saw the adoption of UDL, so Universal Design for Learning, being adopted across many of our post-secondary institutions. And then third, we have mental health awareness. And this really became a focus for a lot of the universities and post-secondaries in Canada, where we were focused on building mental health literacy, destigmatizing efforts, early alert programs, and encouraging help seeking. And so that, like I said, early on really became the focus for many post-secondaries. As we look at students who are wanting to support with coping, we focused in on early response and early alert programs. So really training staff, faculty, and employees in terms of recognizing mental health issues and then being able to refer students to the appropriate supports and resources. In addition, we also focused in on self-management and coping. And so there was a lot of focus on individually oriented interventions, a lot of focus on resilience, and you'll see that emerging all over in the literature around this time, where we really focused again on those individual skills. And then in that bottom layer, again, we really focused on crisis management, responding to students in distress, and suicide intervention and prevention. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because I'm assuming everybody here is very familiar with the Okanagan Charter. And so this was kind of the next document that came into place that really influenced mental health and well-being in higher education in Canada. And so in 2015, the University of British Columbia, which is located on the far west end of Canada, led an international movement of campuses creating and adopting the Okanagan Charter. And so the Charter provides institutions with common language, principles, and framework to become health and well-being promoting campuses. The next guiding document, the National Standard for Mental Health and Wellbeing for Post-Secondary Students. And this is probably one of the most commonly cited documents in higher education within Canada for post-secondary student mental health and well-being. So it really did become the anchor for developing mental health and well-being strategies within Canada. And so it builds from those caucus guidelines that I mentioned earlier, and it was launched in 2020. It provides detailed voluntary guidelines for strengthening student mental health systems within the Canadian post-secondary context. And while most post-secondary institutions were already leading student mental health strategies and initiatives before they implemented the standard has provided an opportunity to build on and strengthen their existing mental health strategies to align with the national best practices. For many, it has been the natural next step in their ongoing efforts to create supportive and inclusive campus environments. And at the University of Calgary, where I'm located, the standard has been integrated into our broader strategy rather than explicitly implemented clause by clause. So this holistic approach has allowed the University of Calgary to maintain our existing strategies while integrating key aspects of the standard, ensuring that the initiative feels cohesive with our broader vision. So it really allows opportunity for tailoring to each institution's needs and experiences. I'll pass it over to Vicki to talk about the Limerick Framework.
And again, you're going to hear a lot about the Limerick Framework, so I'm just briefly going to talk about that we were building on previous documents. The Ottawa Charter, that was built with the WHO, the World Health Organization, and then the Edmonton Charter in 2005, the Okanagan Charter, and here to the Limerick Charter. Love this graphic design. It demonstrates that this is a journey, that our learnings build upon one another, and that working together we can come to a different end. And if you really squint hard at the lake in the back, the Okanagan Lake, you can see the monster Ogopogo. It's very difficult to see. It's got 3 little humps. Anyway, that's an Indigenous tale. And we really are thinking about how the framework now provides a practical, future-focused action plan, and really thinking about those 3 pillars: the healthy people, healthy places, healthy planet. The purpose of this slide is really just to say that in the development of the framework, which was originally called the Charter Renewal Committee, so you'll see the changing terminology throughout there, is that we were committed to bring together people from around all of the International Health Promoting Campuses network. There are 16 networks, regional and national, all the way from Africa to Germany to Canada and the United States. And at each point, for some of the 6 drafts, we were providing input. So Matt Dolph and I were the Canadian representatives on the IHPCN, and so we were worked on the renewal with the Limerick team and University of Limerick. And it was such a great experience. You'll hear more about that today on how it was developed, I'm sure. But at some points, it was the network leads that provided the feedback, and at other points, the leads would go out to the whole network. So Matt and I gathered feedback from all of our Canadian institutions that had signed on to the Okanagan Charter and were part of the Canadian network. So just to say how fulsome of a process it was.
There's a lot of guiding documents and frameworks, and this starts to become a little bit overwhelming for universities, colleges, and technical institutes across Canada in thinking about and figuring out how do we now use all of these and how are we supposed to integrate them. And so just recently, last month in fact, the Centre for Innovation in Campus Mental Health, which is located in Ontario, Canada, more eastern Canada, developed this really wonderful interactive tool that helps post-secondaries kind of figure out what are the intersections, what are the purposes for each of the charters, frameworks, and the national standard. How can they support each other and work together as people are thinking about implementing? We have a lot of people who are really invested in moving forward with health promotion and mental health and well-being on our campuses, and yet sometimes navigating through these documents and figuring out the alignments can be quite tricky. And so what I've highlighted here is actually the intersection of all 3 documents. And so within this, you could actually go in and click on to find out the similarities between the Okanagan Charter and the Limerick Framework, the National Standard and the Limerick Framework, or the Okanagan Charter. And where all 3 join, what we notice is that health promotion really is a whole campus responsibility. And so this value becomes core to the work that we do. And it's the centrality of collaboration and community engagement. So that really speaks to how we do this work. We don't do it in silos. We can't do it in silos, and we can't do it off the side of our desks. It really takes that partnership in order to have full integration across our institutions. It speaks to the importance of student-centered, inclusive, and accessible approaches, right, where we really know the student voice is so important, and co-developing and co-designing strategies with students, and it really supports the idea of ground-up initiatives as well in terms of advancing mental health and well-being. And we find that we get much stronger uptake from students as well when it's really student-driven. We highlight the role of evidence-informed practice and continuous improvement. And so while I think historically we haven't done a great job of doing a lot of evaluation, we've implemented a lot of really wonderful strategies and programs and initiatives, but haven't necessarily done a really effective job in terms of evaluating the impact of those and then really being able to put resources into those things that are most impactful. And so I think what this document is helping us to do is kind of center in again on the evidence-informed practice and ongoing monitoring and evaluation. And finally, we really highlight the significance of leadership engagement and systemic change, which Vicki will speak more to in a little bit. So just finally, as we wrap up this section, I want to talk about kind of the emergence of institutional-specific mental health strategies. So alongside these national and international frameworks, individual universities, colleges, polytechnics also developed campus mental health strategies that were unique to their individual context. And so early on, these strategies typically drew on the Caucus Guide for Student Mental Health, and certainly we did at the University of Calgary. And this is an example of our first campus mental health strategy, and so we were the first ones in Canada to launch a whole campus approach to mental health and well-being. And what we've noticed over the last few years, though, is that there's been growing attention to employee well-being as well. And so there's starting to be some emergence of employee mental health strategies or greater attention to the role of employees within our campus mental health strategy approaches. The other thing I'll just notice about our mental health strategies, because mental health has been such a significant focus in the Canadian context, the strategies really focus primarily on mental health literacy, early identification response, and access to services. And what we're starting to notice is a need to shift that trajectory, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that movement. Within the University of Calgary, we have now gone through a revision of our mental health strategy, and other institutions are starting to do this as well with the emergence of the Limerick framework and starting to look at the integration of these different guiding documents. And so while our early strategy was really focused on very specific recommendations, we found that it wasn't actually flexible enough to be able to respond to changing social cultural contexts, such as a pandemic. And so we really wanted to develop a more flexible strategy. And then we also engaged in about 2 years of consultations with the university community to really find out what the university needed to support their ongoing mental health and well-being. And what we found aligns strongly what we've heard through the Limerick framework in terms of a holistic approach, upstream focus, so not just on the downstream services, but really wanting to create that systems change, and an overall shift in academic and workplace culture. And so my role as now the academic director for our mental health and well-being strategy, I'm very much focused at the broad systems level and really thinking about the whole university and the culture that we have within our university. But we also do our work through strong collaborations. And so as we focus on making change within faculties and departments, how we interact with each other and those individual services, we really rely on partnerships and collaboration. All right. Okay. Got to move along a little faster. So I just want to talk a little bit about the shifting global context. And so in 2015, when we really started to see a shift in kind of the focus on mental health and well-being in higher education, there was a strong emergence of this crisis narrative. And if you read about post-secondary mental health literature, almost all of the introductions talk about the high level of distress in post-secondary students and talk about this crisis that has developed. And so we really have had a growing concern about mental health within college and university students. And initially that led to increase in resources and funding for mental health, a lot of programming that was put into place, a lot of supports and resources. We did a lot of workshops, again, really focused on the individual student though, right? Is that we had to We had to embed skills for students and enhance their ability to cope and be resilient. We also focused a lot of work on mental health literacy and help-seeking campaigns. But what we've started to notice is a bit of a pendulum swing. And so when we focus all this attention on mental health literacy, and we gave a lot of actually diagnostic language to students to talk about their mental health, we also told students, go to counseling, go to counseling, go to counseling. Now we've created a situation where students only want counseling and they really are turning to professionals, and they see that really as the only legitimate support for their mental health and well-being. And also we've noticed this trend towards kind of over-identification with diagnostic language to talk about what are normative developmental experiences. And so while it might be normal to feel anxious before you write a test, right, because it's a situation of performance, students have a tendency then to identify as, I have anxiety, and thinking it more in terms of chronic clinical experience. And that really has an impact in terms of expectations of resources and supports. And for us at university and higher education, again, it reinforces for us the importance of focusing further upstream and addressing cultural factors and being able to start to kind of focus more on the role of peer support and just integrating care and compassion within our institutions. Yeah.
All right, and I think every campus, every country is dealing with a variety of issues, and especially living in Canada with a crazy neighbor to the south that the cab drivers even want to talk to us about. There's a lot of issues to be dealt with there, and trying to stay calm when all of that chaos is going on. Cheeto chaos is how we call him. And so there are many different contexts that we all share, but especially in Canada, we're also thinking about addressing Indigenous sovereignty and thinking about embedding Indigenous ways of knowing and doing within our curricula. And so there's a lot of different kinds of pieces around indigeneity that we are working on. So as was mentioned earlier, I've done a lot of research on the implementation of the Okanagan Charter, and feel free to talk to me about that later. The first study looked at the first 10 universities in Canada that signed the Okanagan Charter in 2016, and following up with them 3 years later to say, how's it going? What we found was incredible differences across those 10, everything from doing pretty well thanks to what Okanagan Charter, right? It went invisible after the signing of the charter. So some of the key pieces, if it's a strong university in terms of the health promotion, they will demonstrate all of these kinds of things, or most of these kinds of things, including a strategy that goes across staff, faculty, and students, not just a student approach. They do have defined milestones to hit. They have an intentional strategic communication plan, and they come back to that very often, including if the leadership talks about it in their convocation addresses, for example, but it should be embedded in key documents such as strategic plans. Without that, it's not going to happen across the whole campus, because as you know, once you have your university strategic plan, every college or school or faculty, whatever they're called in your place, must also identify and highlight those priorities and say how you're addressing them. So the reason why the very first point is bolded and underlined, it should be, and maybe in font 400, is just that you need the support of leadership on your campus. The places where it absolutely went sideways was where the leadership changed. A supportive person, president, provost, had signed on to the Okanagan Charter. Their terms are finite. And as soon as they stepped away, someone else came in with a different agenda. And that agenda setting piece is huge. So if you can be a part of the agenda setting table in whatever way that is, or you know somebody who can be there for you at that table to we call it bend the ear of the king, to get the attention of the key executive leadership is what you need to do, because you're not going to get dedicated resources, human and financial. You're not going to have the collaborative leadership structure. And I call it collaborative leadership, because everybody needs to be pulling in the same direction. You need to have people embedded across the campus, not just in student services, not just in human resources. You need people across, and you need to come together occasionally. So even if you're at faculty buildings across the city or across a portion of your province, you need to find ways to get together in person like this. As we've commented before, now we can do all kinds of collaborations online. It just does not look and feel the same way as if you have a whole day to sit and think and talk to like-minded people. From there, we went to looking at campuses that were considered leaders in 3 countries. And why those 3 countries? Because that's who was on the team, the research team. So we looked at University of British Columbia and University of Ottawa in Canada, University Central Lancashire, and University of West England in the UK. And then in the States, University of Michigan and University of California, Irvine. And you can see already, for example, University of Michigan has had a leadership change, and already they're struggling since the time we gathered our data about this time last year. So just lucky for UBC, they had 2 successive presidents that actually really embraced this, included in their strategic plans, and so on. So now in Canada, in terms of our context, we have over 50 institutions that have signed the Okanagan Charter. Like I mentioned, they've signed it. Hopefully that they're working on embedding it. And then the smaller colleges and polytechnics also have informally integrated Okanagan Charter principles. They're aware of the Okanagan Charter, but they don't have maybe the resources to actually be doing it formally. And we have our Canadian Health Promoting Campuses Network Steering Committee, but also the international one that we're part of. So working together then, we're building working groups as part of our coordinating mechanisms, recognizing at the Limerick conference that we have pockets of excellence everywhere. We have countries that are all trying to move together, but how do we then put it together? How do we build a global coalition towards this work? So we have working groups in Canada. I'm co-chairing the research group there, and I'm chairing the research group for the International Health Promoting Campuses. So what our intent is to share resources, to share opportunities for grants and further research, because that will inform what we do as campuses going forward. And I'm not going to talk to this slide too much, but just that we need to be thinking about resources so that we can continue our research. And there are a whole host, lots of opportunity, lots of research questions on things that we can dive in together. So in closing then, I think we are stronger together. We face the similar challenges, but we have to think about ways of working across the waters, across our big, broad country itself, and then working intentionally with partners maybe who aren't speaking the same language. How do we do that and galvanize the work of Ibero-America? So now more than ever, we need to explore opportunities to enhance knowledge sharing between post-secondaries throughout the world. Opportunities for universities that are leaders and those who are better resourced to share what's working with those that are on the start of their journey or have less resourced universities, colleges, and technical institutes. Our contact information is there, so thank you very much.